Welcome back to H-Lock Gaming. This week in Godforge, episode 12. No sort of weekend leaks or Monday leak as far as character art or anything like that, so we're going to get right into Tuesday's video. I guess we'll see what we get this week. Simon was gone all last week at GDC showing off the trailer and talking up the game, whatever other business stuff he was doing there. So it may be a bit of a shorter week because I imagine Simon has to catch up. He has stuff he has to do for the game and then also his own channel, which is another job entirely on itself. So let's get into Tuesday's video where he kind of breaks down and reacts to the community's reaction of the trailer we saw. All right, I'll do the breakdown real quick, but maybe my greatest moment for my content creation history. Let's take a look.
Okay, so we've got the Blackbird coming in. Really cool. We've actually seen a bunch of people try and depict what's going on here. H-Lock actually had a cool video where he's kind of looking in the background.
That's it, guys. I peaked. I'm done. I retire. Game over. Thanks for watching. This has been H-Lock. I'll see you in the next life. Bye. All right, I'm back in. Obviously, I didn't quit. The game's not even out yet. He talks about how they wanted the trailer to feel, not just visually, but also with the track. They brought Mike Berry on, who's done a ton of stuff for Valorant and League of Legends, I believe. I'll try to link to his stuff down below. And now he's been brought on as the chief marketing officer. Simon mentions that. I think he's actually said that before when they did their podcast, maybe about a month ago now. He then talked about Jerry O'Flattery, who was brought on as EP. I assume that means executive producer, even for a trailer. Similar to what you see on other projects for an executive producer. He sort of ensures that creative goals are met while not going over budget is always how I've kind of interpreted what executive producers do. They do more than that, but that's kind of a broad overview. What do they call that? The 10,000 foot view. And then next he talks about Serena Bell's music, which really set the vibe. I didn't know this, but apparently Dan is the one who found her. I'm not sure if he found her on YouTube, TikTok, or whatever, but he credits Dan with finding her. So kudos to Dan on that, because obviously, as incredible as the visuals were, the music just kicked it up another notch. And he does talk about later how they're not $100 million, several $100 million studio. But I would say that this trailer has AAA quality, something you'd expect from a larger studio. It's just not as long. And he does mention that. He said the more characters you add, the more it costs, the longer it is, the more it costs. So to see them be able to pull this off of something of such high quality with a much more limited budget is pretty incredible. I will say it's kind of funny too. If you watch my video, you can actually tell I was trying to be quiet. My wife was at home working and she was in a meeting, and I didn't know if I started yelling if she could hear me or not, like in her meeting. So I was kind of trying to be reserved, but get my live reaction out. Or not my live reaction, but my first reaction. Anyways, back to the music. Simon did mention, if you watch my This Week in Godforge video from last week, he talks about how there's a club remix that they played. And I couldn't tell. I thought they made it that way, but I couldn't tell if it was just something being played at the same time. But it kind of matched up too well to just have it be a coincidence. So he did say that's going to be put out, plus the full song for the trailer will be out soon on Spotify. I guess us as content creators can use it for something else, but anyone else can just have it as well. So then after all that music, who we got involved, they went to Narwhal Studios to actually have the cinematic made. And one thing I wish he would have touched on a bit more is he actually talks about how they use motion capture. I think I'll fast forward to what I believe motion capture might have actually been. He doesn't say what part was. So I'm guessing this stuff right here is where they actually did the motion capture stuff, like the head turn and all that, and the grab. He didn't say, so I would kind of be interested if, Simon, you see this, if you can share what parts were actually motion capture. That could be pretty interesting. He does also talk about magma in the character's veins, which I think we kind of theorized before. Many people, he's a sun god. Was it, fire, magma? But we got confirmation on that now that it is magma. He then talks about how the sense of the trailer, the reason they chose a non-god character in Broomhild is so that it doesn't feel like it's just God versus God. You do have sort of these mortal beings and legends opposing the gods in some form or fashion. He also talked about how they specifically wanted a female character in there as well. He said, it's Broomhild. She looks like a typical Valkyrie, but she's not the typical Valkyrie. Obviously there's some mythology there. He then goes on to say, they're not a big budget studio and they originally wanted this to be about 4 or 5% of their budget, but it was actually, he said, closer to 3 or 4. So that's good. Not going over budget's always good. That way the game comes out the best it can be. And at the very end, he calls the character that we just saw that Anubis grabbed, or not Anubis, that Ra just grabbed, the Berserker, but I'll see if I can find it and show what I see. Okay, I've paused it here. It's hard to see. This is really the best shot I could kind of get of this character. At the end, Simon says Berserker. But to me, this doesn't look like the Berserker character. So I wonder if he's kind of trying to hide something there or if I'm reading too much into it. Let me go back so you can see his kind of full walk up. Okay, you can see he has full leather on, right? The axe looks similar. Okay, let's go to RagewoodGaming.com and see what we have seen released for the Berserker. Oh, and keep note of this helmet. Okay, here's the Berserker, which this screen grab, I believe, is pulled from a video where Simon is in the demo. As you can see, the helmet is much different. You can see skin on his chest. The shoulders are different. These are not leather. So, I don't know. Am I reading too much into it that he's trying to cover up what that character might be? Or is it just a reskin of the Berserker for the specific scene and it is that character? I guess only time will tell once we get more of the story. We'll find out who or what they were, or maybe we won't. Maybe it was just a common or uncommon champ that was there trying to do his best and fell to a god. Okay, assuming there is no other leaks in between when I'm recording this and Thursday, we'll get to the Thursday podcast. All right, I'm going to do a quick intro of who we got here. We got Chosen, usually on these things, co-hosting. Mike, Chief Marketing Officer, also, directed the trailer we just saw. And I believe it's Yuho is how you say it, but I know him as Crouching Grandpa. If you're familiar with Raid or you're in the Godforge community at all, you guys probably know him as that as well. So I'll just refer to him as Crouching Grandpa because I can say that correctly. And then Aaron, who is now the narrative director. Actually, Crouching Grandpa says something that I don't know is a leak, and it's nothing big, but let's just listen to it and you tell me what you think.
Yeah, for sure. One thing that comes up a lot is that there's a certain group of people that want us to stick true to the original all the way. Like there can't be any deviation. So how do you take that into account in our world building? Because of course you have to have that creative twist when suddenly Zeus is battling a dragon with Hercules. Like it doesn't necessarily make sense from.
So Zeus battling a dragon with Hercules again. Dragons, very important to the story. What does that mean? I don't know. Aaron actually gives, when they ask him who his favorite character is, a bit of a teaser for something he wants the fans to do. But I will save that for the end, and I will get to my breakdown now. All right, as I said, this week's guest is Aaron. See him right here next to Chosen. He is the narrative director. First time on the podcast. He was actually recruited by Sham, so what we've seen so far, kudos to Sham on that. He went to school for writing, and then he added film production. Once he graduated, he said he moved out to LA and actually became a writer at Origin. I know them from Ultima Online. He said he did many things, even, I believe, Ultima Online 2, which I don't know. I think that got canceled. He was there for 20 years. Then he went to Funcom. He didn't really say how long he was there. After Funcom, he said he worked on Metroid, Star Wars Galaxy, and The Old Republic. He said his background is mostly with MMOs. And most recently, he worked on New World. And then he said after New World, he actually worked at some company called Arctic 7. I forget the name of the game he said he worked on. It was ultimately canceled, so not a super big deal. And then recently after that was canceled is, I guess, when Sham approached him and recruited him for Fateless. So for him, writing the main story, he said, what are the gods doing now? Why are they all together? Why are they working together or not working together? In some cases that we may have seen in the trailer, yet to be determined, right? Chosen asks Aaron, about the trailer and sort of the lore within that, but then Mike takes over because he says that was before his time. So Mike does a kind of a quick breakdown of the trailer, which we've all seen and reacted to over the past about a week and a half now. And then Mike mentions also, the big thing that Aaron brings in is sort of the modernized and normalized tone for these myths. So it really fits, in today's world and fits with their game. And then Mike kind of talks about how with so many of these games, story is almost not needed. Like people just skip it and don't really value it. So how do they make sure that is part of the game and keeps you engaged and is relevant? And then they touch on that in a minute. I'll actually get to kind of how they do that. And then from that, Aaron jumps in and says story is very important. And the example he used is Portal. I never personally played Portal, but I am aware of it, and I'm sure many people who are. And he says, that's ultimately just a puzzle game. You can have the exact same mechanics in another game with no story, and it wouldn't have been as popular. So then to touch on why story is important, he talks about, who is the player? And he says, like the cutscenes, who are they aimed at? And Aaron says the cutscenes are directed at you. You are defeating the gods. You're controlling the gods. You're assembling this team. So that's something new we learned about this story. What exactly it means, I'm not sure yet. And then he talks about, based on that, because you're in control, they already have a mind on what things might come out later. And to me, it almost got the feel when he was talking about it. It was very vague. They didn't give details, just how he's talking about it. It feels almost like an expansion of sorts. A lot of his experiences with MMOs, and I did get that feeling when he's talking about a continuation of the story, that it would almost be like an expansion. Obviously, this is primarily a mobile game, so it wouldn't be like an expansion you're thinking of for an MMO. But since that is his background, and that's how he kind of looks at things, that's how I think this story will progress. It will almost be like an entire new expansion, even within the game, as opposed to just some new boss added or some new game mode. So that's very interesting. We'll have to wait and see, though, how that kind of pans out. And after that, Mike talks about, there's no guaranteed success when you go to new companies or even large ones. Aaron and Mike both said they've been at companies that, folded or games were canceled, etc. And Mike says the difference at Fateless is they have good people who listen, whereas with other companies, it's, too business driven sometimes. And related to that, Chosen asked them, is it obvious when games are going to fail? And Aaron says, yes and no. He's been in both. He's been at some where things seem like they're going well, and then somebody higher up just decides, and their game makes the least amount of sense as far as success goes, so it gets canceled. And at other times, you see things not going well, so you kind of see it coming. And then Aaron also says that's the difference with Fateless. All the top people are gamers, so they're more passionate about making a good game instead of just monetizing it. Obviously, that's going to be in there. They have to make money to keep it going. But when you have gamers involved, so the core mechanics and the story are great, it's not always about the bottom line first. Create a good product and it'll sell is kind of the feeling I was getting. Then Chosen talks about when he was still playing well, I guess he still plays games, but when he was making content, he would get invited into meetings for some type of consultant role, I guess. And he said, investors and just people who are high up on the game in terms of a business sense knew so little about a game. He said one example, he didn't say what game, was he went into a meeting and they asked him, do you think what we're charging for this game will be too much? And he had to tell him, well, the game's free. You make money on microtransactions. And this is somebody who's, an investor or, a director. Who knows what he is, but he brought that up to say, Fateless is the opposite of that. And then related to that, Mike says, as long as creative has a voice in these discussions, the games are always in a better place. And then it just leads to a better engaged workforce as far as people creating the game. And he said that is how Fateless is to him. Then Aaron goes on from there to say, one thing that makes his job so easy, once he has shown what he can do, he said the trust was there. They kind of let him just go. They give him, they say, do something about this, or we want something on this, and they just kind of let him go. So he said it makes it a lot easier to create when the trust is there. And then related to that, I forget who, if it was Mike or Aaron, but they both kind of said the same thing is true for the audience. He said it kind of flows. You get that trust to really build that lore, which attracts players, and then the players really get invested into the game. And then Aaron uses the example, once people are dressing up in cosplay for your game, you probably have a successful game. Because then Mike mentions too, he'll get questions like, what's the KPI on a trailer, like the trailer we just saw, and it's not exactly a big return on money, but in the long term it is. So he said that's good too, that the Fateless people see that. It's not all about immediate dollars and cents. And then related to that clip I showed at the beginning, Crouching Grandpa asks, how do you deal with lore and changing? And he said, Aaron says he has to stay true to the heart of the myth, but has to give himself enough leeway to change things that within the story it makes sense why these gods are together or working together or etc. Because otherwise you're not going to keep people engaged with the story. And then related to that, Aaron specifically then says, you are controlling the gods and they are working together. So that is definitely a leak as far as the story goes. What it means, we don't know. So when they get to the question about favorite god that they want in the game or that they've seen so far, Aaron actually issues a bit of a challenge and says, who do players think the main bad guy is? Now, I've said before, I thought dragons were going to play a big part. As I've said, they're either resistant or immune to magic in many mythologies. So maybe the twist here will be gods. They're essentially on even footing with gods, even though gods are, much stronger than the average human. So that's somehow related to how the gods are either being controlled or manipulated, who knows, or coerced. He also did say he thinks people will be surprised. So to me, that seems like the idea that I was saying, and I think others have as well. The crow when Gilgamesh smashes that burning pillar from the trailer, it might be a bit of a bait to make us think he is a bad guy. Because like I said, it could be Odin's bird, or it could be like in the story of Gilgamesh, there's a white bird and a black bird, one to symbolize good, one to symbolize evil. So I don't really know. I don't have a good guess. If you have a guess who you think the bad guy might be based on the trailer we've seen or what we know about the game so far, let me know down below. And then Aaron talks about a story he would like to do eventually is one that focuses on all the different gods of the underworld. So, could we see that? Who knows? But he is the narrative director, so he does have some say. And that could be very cool. And then he kind of teased too. He's like, would they be working together? Would they be all fighting each other? How does that fit into the Godforge story? So they revealed a little bit. We're controlling them and they're working together. At least some of them are. And he made it sound like too, after you defeat a god, he's talking to you. So it makes it seem like there's a reason they're doing what they're doing, but then you gain control of them. So that's new. And then again, just the mention of dragons. And that was about it for the podcast. Okay, that was it for this week. I thought my video was going to be shorter, but it's almost 20 minutes again. But I think that's my shortest video in a while. Thanks to those of you that subscribed last week. If you made it this far, sorry about some of the weird audio issues where it almost sounds like it's cutting out. I think I figured out the issue with that, so hopefully I can get a fix. And I did something in the post-processing that hopefully fixes it a bit. But thanks for watching. If you like what I'm doing, throw me another subscribe. If I get one person this week, that'll make 4 weeks in a row. I got at least one person, and my goal is to get one a week. So, like I said, thanks to those who've been doing that and keeping me going. This has been H-Lock. Thanks for watching. Bye.